Hi friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and today's video is going to be focused on a suggestion that I have for learning to read tarot quickly, proficiently, and to trust your instincts, more readily. Now, before I get into that, I'm going to share the deck that I'm using for this demonstration is the 1JJ Tarot deck. This is the first deck I ever bought, I ever owned. And I think I bought it in like a novelty shop, like Spain's Gifts. I think that's what it was called, or maybe Spencer's. I don't remember the name. But it was like a novelty shop where you could get oddities and things. And I had, if you ever read my blogs, you know that the very first blog I ever wrote was, I think it was called 47 Years Later or something like that. Where I first saw like the image, these cards on a television show, Dark Shadows, and I remembered it. And it really I always thought in my head as a kid, in 1968, I was only 10, like, wow, like these are so cool. Like I hope I see them sometime, and years passed and I never did. And one day I was just randomly in a shopping mall in suburban Philadelphia and I see the deck and I recognized it immediately. And I think there was like a Rider-Waite-Smith deck next to it. But I'm not sure. I don't think there was a choice between this or the other because I only fixated on this deck because I remembered it from Dark Shadows. And I bought it, and I had gone to the mall to buy a record, an album. So for a teenage girl, 16 or 17 years old, to like put the record money aside and buy a tarot deck was something, So I used my money, all my $2. Can you believe it? That's how old this deck is. I used my money to buy this instead of what I went to the mall for. However, being raised and brought up in suburban Philadelphia in the United States, I didn't have the benefit of being familiar with these cards as I might have been if I was born and grew up in Europe, where, tarot games, tarot tournaments are still being played and people would have, decks similar to this. And it was just like intrinsically, like I would be familiar with these cards because I came from Europe or whatever. But that wasn't the case. I was just a suburban Philadelphia kid. I never saw anything like this except on the tarot, except on the Gothic serial Dark Shadows. I knew they were used for telling the future, or that's what I thought, because at the time I saw them, I was only 10 years old. And so, and it was like, a character interpreting the cards and telling somebody their fortune. So I was familiar with the tarot from that perspective and not the perspective of it being a card game. So I had a lot to learn, right? A whole lot to learn. And because there was not a lot, or if any, information on this tarot deck, the only information that was coming in was for the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which came shortly thereafter. This deck came to the U.S. first, and then the Rider-Waite-Smith, which is what it was called in those days, came second. And the only book that I could get on this deck was a book that came with it, where I had to pay extra for it. So I bought it, but you see, it's like a pretty lightweight book. There's not a whole lot of information. And in later years, I realized that the information they put out for interpreting this deck was kind of like a cut and paste job from U.S. Game Systems, Inc., from the Rider-Waite-Smith. So there wasn't a lot, So I was using these cards, but I was learning on my own. No one taught me to read tarot. I had to learn baptism by fire, and unfortunately I didn't have the method I'm about to suggest. But the way I learned, how to read the cards was on my own, and it really wasn't actually baptism by fire because it was a slow, pedantic process of trying to, find out what these cards meant, like looking up Juno and Jupitor, who I had no clue who they were. I had some high school mythology, Greek mythology, so I knew it was probably that, and learning, that. And then there were some images that, might have associated in my own mind with like stories I knew, certainly I knew what the devil was. And, maybe in error, I associated this card with the Tower of Babel, to just start to get a grip on what I was looking at. So, but there were many images that I just didn't know what to do with. Like, I didn't really know what this was referencing. We all know what the sun is. And then, of course, there were all these non-scenic pip cards that, if you want to learn how to read tarot, you have to learn what these things mean, and you have to come up with your own methods. So I taught myself numerology and combining an understanding of what each of the suits meant with the corresponding number that was being represented by. And so, I started to come up with methods of interpreting the cards like that. And I have a numerology playlist for those of you who are not familiar. If you look for my playlists and then you look for the numerological one, that might be helpful, to you if you're learning and you want to learn numerological ways. But there were many that I just didn't know. I just didn't know what the images meant. I assumed this was like a joker, which it's not really, but it looks similar, to that, and it is a bit of a wild card. So, I was struggling with these cards for a very long time, grabbing whatever books in whatever library or bookstore that came out, and usually, as I mentioned, it was always geared toward the Rider-Waite-Smith. Well, we all know what that means, right? So, it was far and few in between when I would ever see a book that featured, what I later learned to be like a Tarot Marseille style, more or less. This particular deck is Papess and Pope. It replaces the female Pope and the Pope with Juno and Jupitor. But other than these two cards, which can be interpreted in place of the female Pope and the Pope, I think these are reasonable representations and substitutes. And I did write a blog article on that, so I'll post that link to that blog article down below. Maybe it'll be helpful to you. But, there just wasn't a whole lot of information. So I was reading the cards maybe for 15 or 16 years. When one day I learned on the television there was a thing for Keen, which was a psychic hotline. And my husband at the time prompted me, like, you could do that. You've been reading the cards for 15 or 16 years. If you don't know the cards, who does, And I kind of felt the same way. I kind of had a certain amount of confidence that, I know the cards as well as probably most people, and I could probably, do this. And, at that time I had 3 small children, 3 and under. And I didn't want strangers coming into my house, but it was cheaper for me, or more affordable for me, to stay home than it was for me to go have a job and pay for daycare. So I decided to try this, to do the hotlines for money. And I, used my trusty deck, which by then I had become pretty familiar with, and I understood the cards. And I'll tell you what, it was like the most terrifying thing I ever did. When I started in 1990, and I maybe worked the hotline, the Keen hotline, for maybe 6 months, certainly under a year, because it ultimately wasn't for me. But I will say this, in the 6 months to a year that I did work on that hotline, my reading progressed leaps and bounds from my understanding before doing the hotline. And I think it's because I was forced to quickly make sense, let me just put a few cards down. I was forced to quickly make sense of, what I was seeing and putting it together, maybe to tell a message or a story, Because, and the reason that I, was prompted to do it quickly or to learn quickly was because I was very aware that the people on the other line were paying a lot of money for a tarot reading. Now, I wasn't getting paid a lot of money, but they were paying a lot of money for my advice, and I never have been, nor will I ever be, someone who tries to keep somebody on the phone, for a prolonged period of time so that I can make more money, right? That's just not my style. And goes counter to the reason I wanted, I want to continue reading tarot for the rest of my life, is because I'm drawn to it for bringing clarity and being helpful to people, and to help healing, right? So, trying to stay on the phone for a prolonged period of time to ream somebody and make a lot of money is just not my game, So having that in mind, when I started, I was like a nervous wreck because I didn't want to keep people on the phone for very long because I didn't want to take advantage of them. So I had to decide, like right then and there, that I was going to be very quick in deciding what the cards meant, so that I could get a message across. Now, invariably, what are hotline readings usually about? The questions are usually like about love, And so, there are others, that you get. You get like the occasional career or a family dynamic or can you trust a friend kind of card. But for the most part, the readings are about relationships or getting back to relationships or something like that. So I had to be able to identify what the cards meant very quickly. It's funny because, we have the Eight of Cups, which is, an emotional, satisfying card, but then it shows that maybe we're involved in a relationship that is ultimately not good for us. It's more like a vice, or maybe we're in it for the sex. And then we have, the Tower, which kind of confirms that, like a not working out, right? So you learn to read quickly, or you learn to to say in quick terms, this is not probably a relationship that you want to participate in, And, like for, another group of cards, we have the Seven of Coins, we have the Nine of Swords, and then we have the Hanged Man, right? And so, they're not the same cards, but if this was for a different reading, or if this was for the same person and they asked another part of their question, especially since there are here, pip cards and not, only one a trump card, you kind of have to make visual sense like really, really fast. And then you have to learn that you trust your first impression, because your first impression, it's like speed chess, right? It's speed tarot, similar to speed chess. That's how I think of working on the hotlines, because you have to commit quickly. You have to make a decision and you have to commit quickly to what it means. And when you do that, you discipline yourself, to grasp the essence of a group of 3 cards, right? Or 4 cards, or however many you would use for the spread. Again, this relationship looks like one that, doesn't promise a whole lot, or it's stagnated, it's not advancing, and it needs to advance. We have the 9 preceding the 12, the Hanged One, right? So we have like a number of moving on to the next realm, or being saturated, or having reached as far as you can get with something. And then the Hanged Man, meaning if you continue in that vein, you'll just be hanging, you'll be in a state of suspension. You won't be growing or, transitioning or, progressing, But at any rate, you sort of come up with a quickness, because you have to be quick, and you kind of come up with your own quickness, and being able to speak on the cards without second guessing yourself. So it's a really good thought, I think, if you do spend some time interpreting the cards on the hotlines. It's a thought for keeping yourself sharp. Now, after all these years, and I do have my own practice. I'm a licensed and credentialed business in the state of New Jersey. I'm Tarot Clarity LLC. So my business is from my private practice, right? The money I make is usually teaching. I'm a teacher, tarot teacher, so I make my decent income, with teaching. But of course, first and foremost, I'm a tarot reader. So I also have an income from my website, for interpreting the cards. But I still do maybe 3 or 4 tarot readings a month on a hotline. Because I like the discipline. I like that like, that like fast pace, like, what's that, that chess that I just mentioned, I like that fast pace kind of like strategy and thinking, and the hotlines really help me with that. So give it a shot. I mean, I don't make my money off the hotlines. I probably make less than $20 a month on the hotlines, so it's not my bread and butter, but I do it because it helps me feel like I'm sharp. It helps me focus on the cards quickly and identify them and make a connection between the image and the question being asked. And it's just been, a good discipline for me. I did notice, I don't know if I mentioned it in this video or not, I can't recall, but, in the 16 years prior to reading the tarot, I learned with more proficiency how to read the cards after six months to a year of working on the hotline. I ultimately, left the hotline and stopped working it because at the time it just kind of felt, I don't know, that the whole gist of the hotline in those days was to keep your client on the phone for as long as you could, and I just couldn't be like that. It was just not who I am. So I stopped. And then after I became a professional tarot reader and I have my own clientele or whatever, I did decide to go back because I did remember how it felt like to be able to do the cards quickly, and it keeps me sharp. And I do work for a psychic hotline currently. Like I said, I do maybe 3 or 4 readings a month. That's it. But it, like I said, it's like a speed chess. It's just just a exercise to keep my mind sharp with the cards and to make quick associations. And I hope that this is a insightful bit of information and that you can use it. And as always, if you have any questions or any kind of conversation, I'd love to participate. So please don't hesitate to ask. Until next time, peace and stay well, friends.